To jump into the room. Really excited for our next event on topics in technology. This one's all about telecom related spend. So we will be chopping up with some subject matter experts associated with telecom related expenses. Always been a thorn in my side as a longtime IT category manager and as the chief procurement officer. Just waiting for a second to make sure that the restream goes live on inside of LinkedIn. In the other feeds, as you know, we tend to live stream all of these out onto LinkedIn Live. So a little bit of housekeeping. Yeah, it looks like are we live? Tina's in the background, by the way, as always. And she is monitoring LinkedIn Live to see if we are live.
Yes.
We are live on LinkedIn. Okay, great.
Have a good time.
So a little bit of housekeeping before I kick this over to Kim and our guest for today. This is a Zoom meeting. Welcome. We love interaction. Kim loves interaction. She is your host for the day. We have chat set up. So if you would like to chat a little bit, you're welcome to chat. If you have questions, Kim, would you prefer the questions to be inside of the chat or inside of the Q&A module? Which one would you like?
Either way works. Q&A probably preferred.
Great. So if you can, as an attendee, ask your question in the Q&A, there's a Q&A module at the bottom of your screen. Please click into the Q&A. In the meantime, if you are here and you're in the chat, please tell us where you're from. Okay, we will be monitoring LinkedIn Live on a separate screen. And if you have questions with LinkedIn Live, please feel free to ask those questions. And we, the operating team, will convert them into the chat so that Kim sees the questions that are coming in from LinkedIn Live at the same time. All right. And with that, I will hand over the keys to Kim. Kim, thank you so much. And thank you to NPI for your continued support of the Procurement Foundry. And thank you for helping us produce this content series for all the technology buyers out there in the world.
Our pleasure. Thanks, Mike. So I'm Kim Addington, the moderator of our panel discussion today. I'm Chief Operating Officer of NPI. We are an Atlanta-based procurement advisory company that helps large enterprises in a nutshell, get the best deal on their IT and telecom purchases. The cornerstone of our services is price benchmark analysis to see how your quotes stack up against peer purchases. We analyzed over 11 billion in IT and telecom spend last year, and 86% of the transactions that our clients submitted for review showed material room for improvement. We also provide license and subscription optimization advice and negotiation intel that helps clients achieve targeted outcomes. One of our core competencies, that's the one that's most relevant to our conversation today, is carrier contract optimization, and we're proud to have one of our senior consultants participating in the panel. So let's get to know our panelists a little bit. Adrienne, can you please tell us a bit about yourself and your experience in the telecom category?
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm so glad to be here. My name is Adrienne Draper. I currently work for Intuit, and I'm a senior category manager for telecom hardware and co-location. I've been there 17 and a half years and been doing telecom a great majority of that time. And then prior to that, I worked with Hewlett-Packard and Agilent, did some technical service management, but also that was my entree into procurement in the last couple of years at Agilent. And then prior to that, I worked for, if anyone remembers, MCI Telecommunications for 12 years. And my last 6 of that was doing technical service management, including supporting one of the world's largest banks' voice networks. So I've been doing a variety of things within telecom, very enjoyable field and very close to my heart. Very happy to be here. I'm a Bay Area native, born, raised, college, and working. So I haven't ventured far, but I've done some traveling and love spending time with my family, our 2 dogs, playing board games, music, and all of that. So nice to meet everyone.
That's terrific. Thank you, Adrienne. One of our viewers asked us to tell everybody where we're coming in from. So I'm on the East Coast of Florida right now, broadcasting from there. And Adrienne, you're in the Bay Area, right?
Correct.
Okay, John, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is John Distefano. I work for Gap Inc. I think most people on the call probably know Gap. We're the largest apparel company in the United States, with the leading brands of Gap and Old Navy and Athleta and Banana Republic. I've been with the company coming up on 8 years now, and I primarily source network and telecom services, but do also a lot of the hardware purchases for the company. Some of the bigger deals with Cisco and Viptela and Mist and Arista and some others. So yeah, dabble in the hardware space, but my background's really in telecom. The previous 20 years before joining Gap, I worked for the big three telecom companies. I worked for AT&T and MCI Verizon and Sprint. So, but I was on the sales side there, interestingly enough. So I have experience on both sides of the table, buying and selling, which I think gives me a unique perspective on the buy-sell process, having done that extensively for the last 30 years. So that's me in a nutshell. Personally, I live down in Santa Cruz, California, which is, I guess you'd call it the very southern tip of the Bay Area, maybe kind of a stretch, but I work out of the Two Folsom office, our corporate headquarters in San Francisco, when we do go to the office. And I'm married and have one child, and we're all avid surfers and skiers. So, looking forward to retirement in 4 or 5 years, and happy to be here with you all today.
Thank you. Matt, tell us about yourself. You're on mute, Matt.
About Zoom is that it reminds you when you're on mute. Thanks, Kim. Hello, everybody. Matt West. I'm a senior consultant with MPI. I've been with MPI for about 11 years now, just over 11 years, actually. Prior to MPI, I've got another probably 20, almost 25 years of experience in telecommunications. 10 of those years were also, like John, I spread it around among the carriers. That included Verizon, included about 6 years with the Deutsche Telekom family of companies, Global One, France Telecom, Equant, a couple of years in Germany. And then one of the last ones was actually with Tata Communications, the Indian conglomerate. So like John, I've got a lot of experience on global enterprise sales or global accounts in telecommunications. And the balance of my time has been doing what I've done for MPI for the last 11 years, which is helping our enterprise customers drive savings in their telecom spend. My team and I have work with clients ranging in spend from anywhere down to about $1 million a year up to over $200 million a year in telecom spend. So we see hundreds, pushing close to thousands of transactions, certainly thousands of transactions and hundreds of contracts annually. And it gives us a lot of insight as to starting to pull about how the standard operating procedure is for a lot of these carriers. So even though I've been out of the carrier business for a while, I continue to see how their playbook runs out and have lots of people in my team familiarity in their playbooks. So in my personal life, I saw a couple people in here in the chat window, one from Alberta and one from Orlando. So there's kind of where I split my time. I'm currently in Kelowna, British Columbia, and we'll be returning to Winter Park, Florida in another 4 weeks, just as hopefully before the first snow is here.
Cool. Thank you, Matt. Well, we have some serious telecom chops here on our panel, so that's really exciting. So I've got a cheat sheet here on my desk with some questions that I'm going to prompt discussion. So let's start by asking John. This is such a broad topic. We'll zero in on what areas our panelists are focused this year. So what's top of mind for you in the telecom spend category, and how are you and your team working through it in 2021?
Yeah, let me take a quick step back in time here. Pre-COVID, we had already moved to SD-WAN. We had already been, we moved to SD-WAN 7 or 8 years ago. We were one of Viptela's very first customers, and I think we were their largest customer for quite a while. And I negotiated that contract. And then we have also been a Zoom customer for the last 4 or 5 years. So we were set up, thankfully, luckily, going into 2020. 2020 was a very tactical year for us, just trying not to go out of business, frankly, keeping the lights on, readdressing contracts, pulling contracts in that weren't due to expire for 2 or 3 years and renegotiating our pricing and trying to write down and save money and extend payment terms and anything we can do to put cash in the bank or keep money from going out the door. That's what we did. So 2020 was, super hectic, very tactical in nature. But we came out of 2020 stronger than we went in, frankly. The last 2 quarters have been record-breaking quarters for GAAP from a revenue perspective, and we're really moving back into a strategic mode. So, this year we're looking very closely at call center as a service, to kind of push our cloud or push our call center services and hardware and infrastructure out into the cloud. We're also looking at cloud voice to replace our legacy POTS line network, voice network in our stores. And I think we've settled on a supplier for that and signed that contract last month. So those are kind of our big rocks for the next 12 to 24 months, moving more of our voice services to the cloud.
Interesting. How about you, Adrienne?
It's funny because I think the strategy for John with Gap and Intuit is very parallel. I would agree. And if you delineate between, pre-COVID and COVID, current state was really trying to make sure there was connectivity for our employees around the world. And so, highly mobile-based workforce. So we were gobbling up data usage, blowing our contracts out. So really trying to, number one, make sure that everyone had the right, devices, that were on the right plans, that they have a high quality. So some real intimate conversations with our wireless providers, just to keep the train rolling in COVID. Pre-COVID, kind of the same things that John mentioned, looking at SD-WAN, also optimizing the LAN access, moving to the cloud, and we've done some of that already. And from a purely sourcing perspective, cost optimization and understanding our contracts. One challenge that we have is, there's a real move to upgrade technologies, which makes sense. It brings, faster, better services and can bring lower costs, but having to match that with what legacy contracts exist. So there's a cost of change. And so if you're not clear around what legacy contracts and maybe early termination charges exist, right, that could be a surprise. So that's something that we recently have dealt with. Did pretty good at it, but did have some aha moments.
So when you talk about mention legacy contracts, who are some of the vendors you're talking about? I mean, there's the usual suspects, but how far does it span?
So, Intuit, though it's global, a majority of our customers are in the US. So it's probably the main big 3, right? AT&T, Verizon, we have some Switch in there. So, the usual suspects there. And then, of course, globally, we deal with the standard global providers in, like India, the UK, France, Australia, and then Mexico and Brazil. So there's some challenges just, moving from a US-based company based on our business strategy to go into those areas and understand how to contract. How do you get those contracts translated to understand them? So some of the logistical challenges, but we're making headway there too.
And so are you managing global telecom spend in a centralized way as you can out of the United States? From a procurement perspective?
Sort of. Most of the network decisions are made from the US in a centralized form, but a lot of the individual countries and regions do have some level of autonomy in terms of who to buy from. right, based on the technology direction of the company as set from the US, if that makes sense.
How about you, John? What's your corollary to that?
Well, we're we're a little different than someone like Intuit, right? Like we're a retailer. We have 2,500 locations in the U.S., another 500 or so abroad. You know, and of course we have probably a pretty similar corporate network. You know, with corporate offices, data centers, fulfillment centers, call centers. So we kind of separate, you know, separation of church and state that way. Like our corporate is kind of different than our stores. So on our store side, you know, we use a reseller approach because we're an SD-WAN shop, so we use a lot of broadband services, DSL and cable, FDDI, and things like that. So you know, with the way the U.S. Landscape is set up for the broadband providers, it's very geographic in nature, right? Like someone who lives 10 miles from me might not be able to get the same cable provider that I can, right? We have Charter and Cox and Suddenlink and Windstream and all these others. So, you know, we use a reseller model to bring all that together. So we're not trying to manage, you know, 150 or 200 different broadband providers to service all of our stores in the nation. So that's I don't know if that's unique in retail, but I couldn't imagine trying to do it any other way. There's just too many small little monopolies all over the country.
Yeah.
So we use that approach for our store network for both voice and data services. The corporate side, you know, more similar to what Adrienne said, you know, using the big three and for a primary and of course having secondary circuits, sometimes with, you know, maybe even tier twos. And, you know, in cases where we have like outlet stores that are in really remote areas, you know, sometimes we have to drop down to a tier 3 type of provider. So, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So a question came in that's probably best addressed to Adrienne from Todd. With the shift toward working from home, do you see efforts to push the corporate network into the home via wireline or wireless solutions, taking the place of VDI or VPN solutions? I think with retail, because you're bricks and mortar, I mean, there's not a lot of work from home option there. But for Intuit, maybe talk first about what percentage of your workforce has gone to work from home and how you guys are dealing with that transition.
So initially, again, the delineation around COVID, most 100% or close to it, were working at home. There's been some soft entry, a small percentage of folks that are back in the office, but again, most of us are working from home. And so really the effort is to make sure our wireless solutions and devices support working from home. So, you know, looking at the tablets, having Wi-Fi connectivity via the laptops and all of that, making sure those connections, et cetera, are set up for everyone and quality.
Mm-hmm.
The other piece too is security. That's top of mind around, you know, making sure that the customer employee corporate data is secure. So that's also a big push.
And you may not be the right person to ask this question, and maybe Matt West can tell us how some other clients are dealing with this. But what are the kind of emerging, most popular information security solutions that are being put around this work from home, work from anywhere scenario?
I know the primary one for Intuit has been SSO enablement, right? So to allow that security step before you have access or entree into the network, that's probably the larger ones. And then of course, all the other cybersecurity efforts and policies that the engineering team, the network team, the corporate security group put in place. I am not privy to all of that, but probably in the concerning contracts, SSO enablement is something that's, you know, a baseline requirement for many of our providers.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So Matt, I'm going to turn to you and kind of go back to the initial question, because you work across a variety of large enterprise clients, helping them with optimizing their telecom spend. And kind of what sort of themes are you seeing? And then kind of dive into more deeply, I think a little more specifically on this work from anywhere phenomenon and how that's impacting the work that you're doing with clients.
Yeah. So I'm actually, I can hear both from John and Adrienne to tie that and the last subject all together is, to lump it into, it's really technology transformation has been one of the biggest impacts on clients over the last 5 years. If you think about what most enterprise customers were on, they were on frame relay in the 90s. MPLS came out and was introduced in 1998 and was actually the standard for wide area networking through today still. Most customers, enterprise customers in their corporate network are still on an MPLS network. Under AT&T, it's branded as AT&T VPN or AVPN, et cetera. Verizon under private IP PIP services. That has finally, in the last 5 years, started to give way to one. The other transformation is out of TDM services, which again, if you go back to the corporate voice network, that was all TDM. It was either ISDN or it was standard trunks or it was POT services. In both cases, they are now moving from a TDM access line into the VPN service. To an Ethernet access has been one of the big transformations that's happened. The migration from MPLS networks to what John talked about in SD-WAN, that transformation. And that actually ties into the vendor management or contract management side that Adrienne spoke to in managing your legacy vendors, because certainly those suppliers that were really, really good and big in the enterprise network of providing MPLS services and TDM voice services were not necessarily the same providers that are now doing hosted voice and SD-WAN. So how do you migrate off your commitments and try to keep your pricing competitive with your AT&Ts and Verizons of the world, while at the same time you're opening up new contracts and migrating some of that spend to Mettel or Granite or 8x8 or 5.9, et cetera. So those two themes kind of come together as to say, here we are transforming to new technologies, and at the same time, we're trying to manage that spend with our legacy suppliers to maintain some competitiveness there while moving that spend away from them, which is a really, really challenging thing to do, because all you're doing is continuing, at the same time they had those core services, the MPLS services were being written down in revenue anyway. So now you're writing down revenue and you're moving business away, and yet asking them to still step up and be competitive. So those are two common themes. I talked a lot about the legacy data networks, but it's again the same thing in the voice solutions, moving from TDM voice services over to hosted voice services, hosted contact center services. And really in what we saw in the last 2 years was this whole push around how that migrates one step further to your hosted voice or your enterprise communication, moving to a Zoom platform where they want to sell you Zoom voice, or a Cisco WebEx where they want to sell you an enterprise voice license on WebEx, or Microsoft Teams now wanting to sell you Microsoft Voice. So it's again kind of this consolidation of those suppliers trying to maintain, hey, I've got these, I'm known for collaboration services, but I really want to get a piece of your voice network too. So let me sell you an enterprise voice license to go along with those collaboration services.
Yeah. interesting. And, as we talked about on our prep call the other day, Amazon and Facebook aren't far behind because they're going to come at it from the consumer end and work out all the kinks. And then, guaranteed it'll evolve. Facebook's going to give us all devices to be real-time FaceTiming while we're cooking dinner and all that good stuff. They're new and very powerful players entering that marketplace. It'll be interesting.
I'd just like to add, to what I was saying, it puts this whole migration from like legacy services to the future, which looks very cloud-based, creates some unique challenges within sourcing organizations, right? So your traditional, categories the lines start getting blurred, right? So when you have a traditional software or legacy software provider like Microsoft that's now offering enterprise voice services, like where does that go within your sourcing organization? Is that a network and telecom play, or does the team that manages the Microsoft relationship traditionally, did they take over that sourcing? And then so like the resources have to start shifting. If everything is moving to the cloud and becoming kind of software based in a way, the software teams start swelling and all the other categories start shrinking. So, every company is going to approach that differently. They may move people around from legacy categories to, software categories or wherever they might see these X as a service services falling within their organization. So that's something we're going through right now, trying to figure out, how do we staff for this?
Yeah, we're going through the same thing, frankly. So if you look at my role as category manager in telecom, it's essentially legacy telecom, right? And there's someone else within our sourcing org, more on the software side, that would deal with any discussions with Zoom or anything like that for new technologies that are more software focused or have a keener element there. So yes, very interesting in terms of also the skill set, needs to change as well, to kind of map to where technologies are going.
Yeah, another example of that is and John alluded to, in the Microsoft world. You've got a team out there that manages that Microsoft contract and negotiates an E5 license, which includes a basic voice license.
Yeah.
And the telecom team doesn't really know that or understand how to capitalize on that to reduce costs in another silo.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
You have to know the core competence of your sourcing team, right? Like, I've got a lot of experience in network and telecom services and hardware, but don't give me a software contract. Like, I can't add a lot of value there. I can execute a contract, but I don't know the category well enough to bring a lot of value. So, it's not fair to me or the company to, ask me to do a contract with Microsoft. I've never managed them. I don't know much about software sourcing. So, it creates a unique and interesting dynamic in the company.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Have done some software, but if you throw me into something like that, I feel somewhat like a fish out of water. There would definitely be a learning curve, right? So yeah, something to look at.
So one area of questioning I had on my sheet here was around how do you approach gathering all the right stakeholders and getting them all on the same page and having collaborative, successful, coordinated negotiation with your key suppliers. And it's interesting. I guess there's a sort of a pre-cloud answer to that question and now a post-cloud answer to that question, right? Because you're kind of struggling with who are even the right people to have in the room, right, as enterprises are going through these transitions. Matt, are you seeing that in NPI's clients?
Yeah, it's incredibly difficult for sourcing to gather up and get, a lot of these services are based on a demand set, understanding what your requirements are and having a methodology to gathering those requirements and putting them into a demand set to a supplier or a set of suppliers. That has always been one of the challenging things in telecom, is trying to understand what those requirements are and put them into a vehicle that allows you to go to market and source that competitively. Because underlying is this constantly changing portfolio of requirements. And so you try to get that together. But for example, I've got one client, and John probably has this, he's got two basic stakeholders. If I understood his position right, it's this corporate community that has corporate infrastructure, warehouses, distribution, et cetera. And then you've got the retail organization that has a whole different set of demand requirements. And to try to manage that across the two of those and put that into a supplier base is a difficult task. I've got other clients that have a very, very distributed authority to order services. And so to try to understand what they're ordering and pull that back into a centralized demand set is also challenging, and has just been exasperated during COVID to try and understand what everybody's doing.
Yeah, I know from our perspective, early engagement is the key, or one of the keys, in terms of understanding future requirements and all of that. So, the whole challenge of, Adriene, we want this, here's a contract, get it done. I think that our businesses are understanding, and our, network folks, it's like early engagement is good. Bring her in so she's aware of what we're trying to do, right? Maybe also gain some market intelligence, some objective view of those services, from an outside consultant or something like that, but not springing things last minute. And that's changing. That's been very, very helpful. So yeah, stakeholder and partnership internally, early alignment is one of the keys to make this happen successfully.
Yeah, that's
Couldn't
true.
agree with that more. Your naturally aligned partners internally, especially on the cost savings initiatives, are certainly finance. Like, I work super close with finance and legal, and of course my Gap Tech or IT stakeholders. And sourcing has a very strong position inside the company at Gap. We're not procurement, we're not purchasing, we're a true strategic sourcing organization. In fact, we have a final say in vendor selection at the end of the day. So that does give us a lot of credibility. But along with that comes, of course, responsibility. And you have to be equally or better knowledged in your sourcing category to pull your weight here at Gap. You have to know your suppliers, you have to know the market, you have to know the products and services you're buying. You have to be able to stand on equal ground to defend sourcing selections and things like that. So yeah, but being aligned with those internal stakeholders and getting early insight, as Adrienne said, and we routinely attend most of Gap Tech's meetings, especially the kind of roadmap meetings. Like, we're pretty tight. It's great. So without that, I've been in environments where that's not the case, and you end up in a mad scramble every time. So that early insight's key, Adrienne.
Okay, thank you. We have a kind of there are 3 or 4 different questions that are all around the same topic that have come in, and it's around unified communications. So thoughts on broadband being a ubiquitous utility in the homes of teammates versus paying for it as corporate expense. The pivot to remote work over the last year, has it had any impact on organizations that may have moved to unified communications? And then another person observes that, and I think this is really interesting, my experience is that software organizations should be engaged in network procurement and UCaaS discussions, but typically are not qualified to drive network migrations independently. So that's kind of, John, to your point of there's various types of expertise that are required today to make this migration and to do it in the most cost-effective way. Anybody have any thoughts on unified communications and where that fits into your strategy?
Well, if by unified communications we're talking about things like Zoom and presence and things like that, obviously last year that became front and center for everybody working remote. Hopefully everyone had some kind of solution in place. one of the interesting things that didn't come up last year at Gap was like connectivity to people's homes. Like it just wasn't, I don't know if everyone just already has some kind of broadband service at their house, but very few people, had an unreliable connection at their house. And at the end of the day, Gap didn't take really, we didn't consider that our responsibility, I guess, maybe might the right word for it. I mean, if people didn't have good broadband at the house, it was kind of on them. So, people figured it out. They did whatever they had to do. Maybe they bought things like femtocells at their house so they could, extend the wireless network out to the house. They didn't have a good broadband connection and they ran Zoom over 4G, right? So, we do support, initiatives like that, but it's not like we were going out and buying broadband for everyone at their house or a new, data only Wi-Fi device or something,
I think, Kim, that was one of the questions exactly. It was, and that's across our client base. We saw very few cases of where the enterprise customer started paying for broadband for their associates. So the answer to the question is yes, everybody assumed that you had broadband.
Same here. And then prior to COVID, Intuit was pretty much a heavy UCC enterprise anyway. So, with COVID, we had to do some things to support it more fully. But yeah, it wasn't like a breakthrough technology that we had to suddenly scramble to come up to speed with. We were pretty much heavily invested there anyway.
Okay.
And I would also say to the other question around this, software teams engaged in trying in the transformation of voice services or voice licenses or network. It's very true. They should be engaged in that, and it's a part of it. But there are so many other factors to consider in this whole migration from TDM to UC that require true network expertise and voice expertise that just is not within that software team.
So a question that came in was, do you see telecom hardware market shrinking with the move to the cloud? So are we seeing that spend come down in the real world for your organizations?
Definitely. Yeah. Exponentially going down because of cloud migration. So, it's a shift in expense, and it's nice to see that, that's one of the benefits, right? But then obviously you have to manage the spend of where it's going, but definitely seeing a decrease.
Yeah, infrastructure as a service, right? That's what we're talking about. So, you kind of shift the spend. People like Adriene and I look more at like CapEx, right? Your capital expense spread out over time. We pay for telecom services on a monthly basis, right? Versus OpEx, which is a lot of money up front. So, the hardware category is very OpEx focused. You pay for a bunch of hardware, you pay for it up front, then it amortizes it over 5 or 10 years or whatever. Then it gets depreciated and you replace it. Telecom services is the opposite. So you see a lot of shift in the focus from your traditional hardware purchase. Now you're buying your hardware as a service, basically, you could call it that. And now you have to start watching your usage. Your usage numbers can go through the roof when you start buying cloud services, and you don't even know what's happening. Like all these people are signing up. Like if you don't have governance behind your cloud services, you're going to be unpleasantly surprised at the end of the year, because your cost can go through the roof and you don't even know what's happening.
In some small ways, it actually shifts in other ways. For example, in an office space where people are coming to the office, historically, where there was a desktop set on the phone set on the desk, a new employee would come in, they would wipe that down with an alcohol swab or whatever, and they're okay with that desktop set. But now with soft phones and headsets, it's like, ooh, I'm going to put on somebody else's headset. No. So your consumable cost of going out and buying headsets, whereas you just bought one desktop phone and it lasted for years and years and years and years, Now you're having to buy a new headset every time you change associates, and maybe even for the same associate multiple times a year. So, and those are not cheap either to buy a headset. So, there's some minor things, but in the big scheme, yes, the hardware costs are going away.
Interesting. We had polled, in preparation for this session, we polled the procurement boundary community to ask what sort of topics would they like us to address. And one of them is sort of kind of for the Wayback Machine these days. It's an area of difficulty for some organizations is getting telecom companies to support POTS lines for phones, faxes, elevators, alarms, and some point of sale systems. So is this an issue for any of our panelists today? And then, Matt kind of speaking on behalf of a broader set of organizations. What are we seeing there?
I'm seeing, and in one example I have working with an engineer, he needed a POTS line to support like elevator and couldn't find it until at the last minute there was a supplier that was able to provide it, but looking at the major carriers and all that, could not find anyone that would provide that service. So that just talks about how things have changed, because POTS were, one of the mainstays of the telecom industry for years and years and years. And now to have difficulty finding that, because there's still some use cases for it, it can be a challenge.
Yeah, there are some local exchange carriers that just aren't offering it anymore. If you have it, they'll support it, and they keep saying the FCC is going to sunset the service, and they try to get you to move over to some kind of cloud service or SIP-based service every year, but they extend the moratorium another year. So I don't know if POTS lines are going away anytime soon. They're certainly not available everywhere. We have had instances in some of our stores where, especially new stores, where they just wouldn't sell it to us. Like, you can't get that there. So, we've had to put in some kind of SIP service or something. Yeah, POTS lines, it is a 120, 130, 140-year-old technology. I mean, it's like Alexander Graham Bell stuff, like 2-wire analog lines. Like, it's been around forever, but you know what? It works. It's cheap. It's super cheap. So we've kind of been kicking the can down the road and replacing our POTS lines because it doesn't cost us anything.
Right. I know for us, it's important, I think, for everyone to understand, the contracts and what POTS you have under contract. Because I tell you, if they revert to tariff pricing, there is a market difference in pricing, right? Yeah. So I would recommend just keeping your eye, because we've been surprised by that a couple of times, and it's not pretty to see the jump in pricing.
You can easily jump back to 100, 150, 160.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's
and
crazy,
you multiply that several times over, it can be, kind of costly. So yeah.
They are the bane of every customer's telecom portfolio, because they're out there. It is in many cases difficult to know what they're used for. And it's difficult to determine that, because you call them, and if there's no answer, well, that really doesn't tell you what it's there for. The best case is you do get an answer and you get to talk to somebody. If you get an answer by some sort of a modem, that doesn't help you either, because you don't know, is this really a fax machine that anybody's paying attention to? Is this a fire alarm? Whatever. So they are very, very hard to track down and understand, can I get rid of this, period, and delete it? Or can I move it? And, relatively under contract, as Adrienne said, these things can be as little as $30 a month. Out of contract, they can be $160 a month. But the dollars of now, when you go into most enterprise customers now left with maybe 10, maybe 15 at a site. The dispatch cost, if you're only paying $25 or $30 a month, the dispatch cost of sending somebody out to tag those down and find out what can be eliminated, find out how they can be replaced with either a POTS in the box wireless solution, or a POTS in the box broadband solution with using a analog telephone adapter. that whole ROI of dispatching and replacing it requires a good year of paying for it under contract, or more than a year, 18 months of paying for it under contract. And it's just hard to convince somebody to take that on, to say, yeah, for the long term, we need to do it. But it's not going to have any return on it in the next 18 months.
Yeah, it's interesting. Now, one of our audience members predicts 5 years from now, POTS is over. It's gone. Only 5 more years left. So we'll see.
We'll see.
They said that
We'll make a note and check
that 5 years ago and 5 years before that.
I think they said the mainframe was going to be dead a long time ago too, right?
That's right.
And all the AS400s would be gone. But I don't think that happened either. We'll see. Kind of funny. One topic that somebody posted, and I'll be interested to hear the perspective on whether this is a factor in this type of cloud spend, is cloud egress. Is that any kind of emerging issue for telecom related spend? I know it's an issue for platform as a service, but anybody experiencing challenges there, or Matt, are you seeing any cloud egress concerns as you negotiate contracts for cloud-based telecom?
Yeah, I saw that in the chat, but I'm not sure what they were referring to as far as cloud egress, in what context that was. So
Okay.
That doesn't ring a bell with me either.
Okay. All righty. So we're coming down to just 15 minutes left here, and it probably makes sense to poll each of our panelists and ask them to talk about a takeaway, as you reflect on this, where we are right now in large enterprises in this spend category. And this is a bit of a transition year. What's one takeaway from this discussion that you'd like to leave our audience with? John, let's start with you.
Oh, wow. If we're talking about spend management, how to control your spend, how to keep your spend predictable and contain it, I think it all starts with knowing your suppliers, knowing your category, knowing the products and services you're buying, being close to your business partners, getting early insight, knowing where, what kind of T's and C's you can put in your contracts to minimize surprises. One of the things Gap does across our store network, where, things start adding up quick, right? Like $5, paying $5 extra for a service, multiplied by 3,000 starts adding up quick. So, market intelligence, and this is not an MPI commercial, but market intelligence is very important, and price benchmarking is invaluable to me. It's easy to know the rest. There's 1,000 people that provide it. You use your personal experience. You work for, some of these companies you're buying for. And in fact, in some cases, I've renegotiated contracts I put in place with Gap. Like, we know where the bodies are buried. But having a partner like NPI, and they're not paying me to say this, I promise, it is really a game changer for me. The hardest part for me is knowing what the price points are in the market. What is a fair market value for this service? And I haven't found another market intelligence company that can provide that. Like, Gartner can provide you with the magic quadrant, tell you who's, a big player, or, who provides the features and functions. But like, finding that price point, boy, that's a tough one. You have to have a third party company who's gathering that data to know what the real market value is for things. So, those things are really important for managing your spend. We also negotiate flat rate pricing, postalized flat rate pricing across the country for 100 meg cable, or, whatever, 50 meg DSL, or 50 meg dedicated internet access. Like, it's the same price no matter where we buy it. So it's a lot easier to manage on the back end like this. If you're trying to go through every site and figure out if you got billed right, and it's a different cost at every site, like, it's unmanageable. So, getting flat rate postalized pricing in place for us was a game changer. And you may pay a slight premium on the front end, but on the back end, it's easy to catch errors. It makes your job and the job of, if you have a TEM provider, much easier. So, I think that's a big one.
Great, thank you very much. And glad you are finding great value in the MPI services. That was nice to hear. Adrienne, what would you like to share with everybody as a takeaway?
I think if I could have two, one would be, I agree with the telecom expense management piece. We do have a provider in that area, and I tell you, it makes a difference. As long as you understand the scope, and that scope is not only you paying the bills, but also looking for errors. And unfortunately, there's a lot of billing errors that happen. And when you add those up over time, it's quite a pretty penny, chasing down contract, what's being charged versus contract, right? So that helps kind of stop the bleeding, for lack of a better term right now, money in the back end. So that's very, very helpful. The other piece, it's around stakeholder and partnership. So if you know that your partner in technology is looking at, new technologies, make sure when you negotiate the contract that you have a technology upgrade clause if you can get it, right? So, what that's saying is, hey, if we happen to change from, I don't know, MPLS to, something else, we're not accountable for that MPLS commitment that we had, right? There's lots of parameters around that, but make sure that's in there.
Yeah.
But also work with your engineers and all that to make sure they're not ordering circuits with a 3-year term because the price looks better right then when there's going to be a technology change. So that also stops the bleeding on the back end in terms of early termination charges. So that would be the two things that I would think of.
Thanks very much. Matt, how about you?
Yeah, I would probably say from a sourcing perspective, one of the biggest things that is a great impact on costs is we get in the habit of looking at, or a lot of our clients have gotten into the habit of looking at these contracts as being a 2-year cycle on wireless or a 3-year cycle on wireline. And that assumes the underlying portfolio or the underlying estate is static, and it's just not. And so the contracts are actually a lot more flexible to renegotiate and open up and go specifically as new transactions or new applications become available to or required by the customer, to go back and look at those contracts and update them or open them up. If you've got enough leverage or the right kind of leverage, there's not a real obstacle to doing that. And one of the easiest ways to look at this is in the wireless portfolio. A wireless contract, the typical is a 2-year contract. But if you're using subsidized devices, meaning you're getting free devices from your carrier in exchange for a 2-year minimum service term, what really drives that contract is the number of devices that are under their minimum service term. If you're essentially out of contract with over 70% of your devices, then you've got a lot more leverage to go back to that carrier and say, look, I've got 70 of my devices that are free to move to another carrier. We need to talk about this again. And it doesn't matter where you are in that 2-year life cycle, as long as you have that, a good portion of your population out of contract. And kind of the same thing in the wireline space. There is frequently new things being deployed, new requirements for bandwidth, rolling out new applications that open up the opportunity to go back to your supplier base and say, look, you can either earn this new circuit. We've got a requirement for a new 10 gig circuit between these 2 data centers. You can either earn this or I can move it somewhere else. So as long as you're managing your spend with that and satisfying your commitments, you've got a lot of leverage to go to them throughout the 3-year cycle and get better deals on individual services.
Yeah, to build on something Matt said there, you can also build in, annual benchmarking clauses in your contract, right? You can sign a long-term contract, but you have the right to do an annual benchmark. And part of that, again, would be engaging someone like MPI to help you understand what the new market rates are a year and a half into a 3-year contract, right? So, build that into your contracts. And I think that, the technology migration clause that Adrienne mentioned are real big ones. Yeah, those things.
Yeah, and then lastly, I would add, challenge your incumbents. I know before Intuit at another company I worked at, the incumbent was very complacent. It's kind of like your business is locked in with us. And, it was really kind of I'm sorry to say it, a sense of arrogance. And so when the opportunity comes, renewal time or whatever, insert that competition, right? Of course, align with your stakeholders to make sure there is the possibility to change, but also I would just keep the competition going in terms of, what's best for our company, and don't settle for complacency.
Yeah, and to build on that comment, we deploy a dual vendor strategy for almost every piece of business we buy. So, I break down, my spend between suppliers, and I have an alternative supplier, that is on equal footing, with the other. And so, and they know, right? They know very well. And, when one wins a big deal the next year, you better believe that following year they're coming with both guns out. And so, leveraging that competition has also been a key factor in, keeping our costs down, keeping them contained, no surprises. And, we have them at each other's throat by design. So dual vendor strategy, I think, is an important tool in your war chest for cost containment.
I think John's got it. It's between the leverage of having multiple suppliers or doing multiple vendor management better, as well as having leverage built into your contract. I just see it in the chat window, making sure that you don't overcommit, making sure you've always got excess spend that you can move someplace else, are all ways of maintaining competitiveness in your supplier base.
Yeah, and John, the fact that you do that is it's testament to that you do take a strategic sourcing approach, and you have the support of executives in doing so, because it's a lot of organizations just aren't strong enough to enforce a dual vendor strategy, and it's just it's really excellent strategic approach. Well, I think we're winding down our hour. Let me just look at any other questions. Maybe this is a quick one. Any other advantages of resellers or aggregators? And John, you've already talked about that in your organization. Adrienne, Matt, any words of wisdom there?
Yeah, we actually have used an aggregator currently and in the past. And, the premise is they have the buying power, right? Because they're kind of representing you and sourcing from several vendors that can get better pricing. So that was, very interesting for us in years past. However, we're working a scenario now where we're actually pitting potentially an aggregator against a direct bid from a vendor, a carrier direct, again, in the spirit of competition. Mm-hmm. So we don't want to make the assumption that everything we buy from a reseller is definitely cheaper. There's times when there's, you just want to check and make sure that's still the case.
Yeah. Thank you.
I'd agree.
All righty. Well, we're at the top of the hour here. Thank you all so much for your time and your thoughts today. It was terrific. I hope everybody in our audience enjoyed the session, and we can make contact information available through Procurement Foundry for direct connections with any of the panelists here today. So everybody have a terrific day, and thanks for spending time with us today.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks to Kim. Thanks to everybody. Thank you to the panelists today. It was an amazing show. We had almost 85 or 90 participants between LinkedIn and the group today. So thank you so much for that. Lots of additional questions. Just a reminder that if you have more questions that you didn't get answered today, NPI has a channel inside of the Procurement Foundry. If you do want to ask NPI questions, or you want to chew on your telecom related costs a little bit more with some of their subject matter experts, feel free to reach out to them inside of the channel, inside of Procurement Foundry. And Adrienne, thank you so much for your time today as well. It was great hearing your insights. So we really appreciate it. And thanks to all of the participants. Have
Mike,
a
this is going
great.
to be recorded, right? We can send out a link if people can share it with
Absolutely.
their colleagues.
So
right?
this is recorded and it is now embedded in the Procurement Foundry LinkedIn stream. So if you didn't get to watch the whole thing, you can go back into the LinkedIn stream inside underneath Procurement Foundry, or you can link to it if you want. So if you go to the Procurement Foundry LinkedIn page, you can go to click share that post with all of your folks, and then they will see it as well.
Cool.
Okay.
Thank you.
Cheers, everyone. Have a great
Thank you.
day.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.